Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Cursed Ring. Holly Arnold had always been captivated by family history. Her grandmother, Edith, loved to tell stories of their ancestors, seafaring traders who had once made the Isle of Wight their home. One day, while helping her grandmother clean the old family house, Holly came across a small, intricately carved wooden box in the attic. Dust and time had dulled the ornate patterns, but it seemed to hum with a quiet power. Holly asked, holding the box up to the light. Her grandmother turned, her face paling as her eyes locked on the object in Holly's hands. "Put that down, child. It's the ring, but we don't speak of it." Curiosity piqued. "What ring?" Edith hesitated. "It's been in our family for generations. Every woman who's worn it, they've met terrible ends." She had always loved hearing ghost stories, but there was something about her grandmother's tone that sent a chill down her spine. "The ring is cursed. It brings misfortune, death." "How could a ring do that?" "Open it, if you must," Edith said quietly, her voice resigned, "but don't put it on." Inside lay a silver ring, tarnished with age, adorned with a dark, almost black gemstone. The stone seemed to swallow the light, its surface smooth yet cold, as though it held within it the weight of centuries of tragedy. Holly asked, entranced by the ring's allure. "I've tried. It always comes back. Some things, they're bound to us, tied to blood, against her better judgment." It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold against her skin. She felt a strange compulsion, a pull from the ring itself, almost as if it wanted her to wear it. Her fingers trembled as she slipped it onto her ring finger. "Enough!" Edith shouted, lurching from her chair, but it was too late. The ring was on. Suddenly the room felt colder, the light from the windows dimming as shadows crept in. Holly's vision blurred for a moment, and in that brief instant she felt something dark and ancient stir within her. "Holly," Edith gasped, her voice weak. "Take it off." The ring was stuck, as if welded to her finger. Panic set in as she pulled at it, but the more she tried to remove it, the tighter it seemed to grip. That night, Holly lay awake in her childhood bed, the old house creaking with the sounds of wind and time. But it wasn't just the house's usual groans that troubled her. She felt something else, a presence watching, waiting. The shadows in her room seemed to move, and in the quiet darkness she swore she heard faint whispers, voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The next morning Holly woke to find bruises on her arms, dark fingerprints that weren't there before. She had no memory of how they'd gotten there, but a sense of dread weighed heavily on her. Her grandmother, now pale and frail, watched her from across the breakfast table with sorrowful eyes. "The curse has started." Over the following days, strange things began to happen. Holly would hear footsteps behind her when no one was there. Objects in the house would shift positions, always returning to the place she had found the ring. Worse, her reflection in mirrors began to change. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of movement, a shadow passing behind her. But soon, the reflection stared back at her with a twisted grin, a malevolent version of herself trapped behind the glass. Desperate, Holly sought answers in the town's archives, digging through old records about her family. She learned that the ring had belonged to Eliza Arnold, her great-great-grandmother, who had been found drowned off the shores of the Isle of Wight, the ring still on her finger. The story went that Eliza had worn the ring to a gathering of prominent locals hoping to show off her newfound wealth. But tragedy struck. The ship she was sailing on sank under mysterious circumstances. Every passenger aboard drowned, save for one man who claimed the ship was cursed by something unseen. As Holly researched further, she discovered a pattern. Every woman in her family who had worn the ring had died violently. Some had fallen ill, others had accidents, but all shared the same fate. Death soon followed. With the curse closing in, Holly returned to the attic, determined to break the cycle. She scoured old tomes, desperate to find a way to remove the ring. One evening, while leafing through a particularly ancient journal, she found a passage that chilled her to the bone. "The curse can only be broken by sacrifice, a life for a life. The ring demands blood." Her stomach turned. Could that be the answer? Was she supposed to sacrifice someone to save herself? That night, As the winds howled outside, Holly felt the presence stronger than ever. The whispers grew louder, and the house groaned as if it were alive. In her reflection, her distorted self grinned wickedly, lips moving in silent mockery. Holly," it hissed. The voice filled her mind, deep and ancient. "You cannot escape. The ring is yours." The walls of the old house seemed to close in. Her reflection began to bleed into reality, the twisted version of herself stepping out of the mirror, cold eyes gleaming with malice. Desperate, Holly fled to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The winds whipped at her hair as she stood at the edge, the black waves crashing below. She felt the weight of the ring pulling her down, an invisible force dragging her closer to the abyss. In her hand, she clutched the wooden box, now empty. The sea called to her, the whispers louder than ever. She saw them, her ancestors, women drenched in seawater, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in agony. They reached for her, their skeletal hands clawing at the air. "Now join us." To end the curse. Her life for theirs. The sacrifice. With a final scream, she tore the ring from her finger, the metal burning her skin as it came loose. In one swift motion, she hurled it into the sea, the cursed ring sinking into the black depths below. The wind stopped. The whispers faded. The presence was gone. But as Holly stood at the cliff's edge, breathing heavily, she realized with a sinking heart that the curse had not ended. The bruises on her arms darkened, spreading like ink beneath her skin. She had broken the bond, but the ring had already claimed her. And just like her ancestors before her, Holly Arnold would not live to see the morning. The sea was waiting. Holly Arnold staggered away from the cliff, the weight of her impending fate pressing down on her like a suffocating fog. The cold air clung to her, though it was nothing compared to the icy dread that gripped her heart. She had rid herself of the ring, but the curse was far from over. Her body felt foreign now, as though it no longer belonged to her. She stumbled back to the old family house, its creaking wooden structure looming like a sentinel of doom. Edith was waiting for her, sitting in the dimly lit parlor, her frail hands clasped together. The moment Holly walked through the door, her grandmother's face fell. "It's too late?" Edith asked softly, her voice breaking. Holly nodded, barely able to meet her grandmother's gaze. The bruises on her arms had spread, a creeping darkness that now crawled up her neck. Her reflection in the hallway mirror caught her eye pale and gaunt, as if the life was slowly draining out of her. "Ah?" Holly asked, her voice hollow. Edith sighed deeply, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "It'll come for you tonight, just as it did for all the others." She knew what Edith meant, the thing in the shadows, the presence that had been haunting her since she put the ring on. She could still feel it lurking, waiting for the moment when it would claim her fully. As night fell, Holly sat with her grandmother by the fire, both women lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind howled, and the house groaned as though it were alive, responding to something unseen. Every now and then, Holly would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, fleeting shadows that slithered along the walls. Suddenly, the fire flickered, the flames sputtering as the room grew colder. Holly's breath came in short gasps, her heart racing in her chest. "It's starting," Edith whispered. "Holly, listen to me. Whatever happens, don't let it take your soul. Fight it. Fight it with everything you have." Holly wanted to believe she could, but deep down. "Still," she nodded, clenching her fists as if she could hold on to what little time she had left. As the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The very air seemed to hum with malevolent energy, thick and oppressive. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Holly could feel it now it was here. A low, guttural voice echoed from the darkness, not spoken aloud but filling her mind with a cacophony of whispers. Holly." Figures began to emerge from the darkness, grotesque and twisted apparitions of the past, the faces of the women who had worn the ring before her. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in silent screams, their arms outstretched as they reached for her. Holly scrambled to her feet, backing away, her breath shallow and her heart pounding. She could feel them closing in, their cold fingers brushing against her skin, pulling her toward them. Holly screamed, but the figures only multiplied, their faces contorted in pain and anger. The whispers grew louder, deafening, as if the very walls of the house were screaming with them. and then she saw a figure taller than the others, standing in the shadows near the doorway. It was not like the ghosts of her ancestors. No, this was something far older, far darker. Its form was shrouded in black, a faceless figure of despair, towering over her with a malevolent presence that made her bones ache with terror. "Ed, the ring is mine," the voice hissed. The dark figure began to move toward her, slow and deliberate, its presence suffocating. Holly's legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, feeling the pull of something far beyond her control. She knew this was the end. But just as the figure reached her, something unexpected happened. The fireplace erupted in a blaze of brilliant light, and the dark figure recoiled, hissing in anger. Holly gasped, her eyes wide, as Edith stood at the hearth, holding a small, weathered book, an old family grimoire, passed down from their ancestors. Edith's voice rang out, strong and defiant, reciting ancient words Holly had never heard before. The air in the room seemed to shift, the shadows trembling as the presence began to retreat. The spirits of the dead women recoiled, their forms flickering like dying flames. "Ugh!" Edith cried, her frail hand shaking as she held the book open. "You will not have another Arnold. I banish you, accursed one," the dark figure howled in rage, its form flickering. Holly watched in awe as Edith's words seemed to push the entity back, driving it toward the doorway, where the shadows receded into nothingness. With a final, ear-piercing screech, the figure vanished, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The fire crackled softly, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Holly collapsed, gasping for breath, the bruises on her arms still dark but no longer spreading. Edith rushed to her side, her eyes filled with tears. "It's over," Edith whispered. "It's over, my dear." The darkness in her soul had taken root, the curse still clinging to her like a second skin. She could feel it lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Days passed, and life on the Isle of Wight returned to its usual rhythm. But Holly knew that the curse wasn't truly gone. She had survived the night, yes, but the ring was still out there, somewhere in the cold depths of the sea, waiting to be found again. And one day it would be. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.